heartfelt prayer, the worshipper's attention is concentrated on the object of worship so much that he is not conscious of anything else besides. Gandhi, Ashram Observances in Action.
The kind of concentration that Gandhi is describing here, which is difficult to achieve indeed, brings us down to a very deep power within us. There is a story about a Jewish sage who was praying out on the field, standing up as Jews did in the ancient world, and he is actually bitten in the ankle by a serpent. Later on, he commented on that, and he said, "Woe betide me if I had even noticed it." So there was an extreme example of our capacity to reach that kind of concentration. If we do that willfully and not just because something has scared us or something like that, but if we will the concentration of our mind on a noble object, especially the most noble of all objects, God, we reach a kind of power which is basically invincible.
This form of absorption, samadhi, where your sense of self, the process, and whatever it is that you're focusing on become one thing. This absorption practice, this one-pointed focus, there's a lot of terms for this kind of practice, jhana practice. And as you do it, it reduces your sense of little self, your egoic self. There is no extra room for your thoughts about what you want and don't want, and I like this and I don't like that. That process is reduced because you are so engaged, so immersed in the object of your meditation that what you find is there's just reality. If it's your breath, there's just the breath. There's not even room for you to be breathing. There's just breath. And that kind of deep concentration is very potent for helping us to see more clearly what's going on. Because normally we're so dispersed and distracted by 10,000 things. We have so much internal noise that we're not actually able to observe what's happening in our lives. We're just aware of noise and confusion. And so if you experience that kind of world, it can be very helpful to whittle it down to become this all-encompassing single point, this deep stillness that can be developed. And if I can put in a plug for the Taoist method of developing that deep absorption through letting go, through settling in stillness and effortless action, this non-doing style practice, in my experience, it is the most effective way to practice, rather than squeezing your mind and trying really hard to focus, which is exhausting and leaves you in a different place, then deeply letting go and settling inside, releasing distraction and being fully present. The quality of that experience, of that relationship with reality, is transformative for yourself, and if you bring it into your change-making peace work, then for your whole community.
Power based on love is 1,000 times more effective and permanent than the one derived from fear of punishment. I am fascinated by the law of love. It's the philosopher's stone for me. Gandhi, Young India, January 8th, 1925.
You know, a Native American woman, I believe she was Apache, said, "It does not matter as to the name of God, because love is the only God of all the world." That's the kind of love that Gandhi is talking about here. Not an emotion of which we can be conscious and which can be, moving and very creative and positive in its way, but a very, very deep creative force which actually brought this universe into existence. This is Gandhi situating us in our most exalted and most advanced cosmic context, which I find very inspiring.
I also find it very inspiring and transformative if I view all of humanity, if I view my community, myself, my place in the world, in this grand cosmic context, that I am a part of the whole, that I am one expression of the entire universe itself, whatever term we use for that, if we call it spirit or God or whatever it is we choose to refer to it as, that is incredibly expansive for me. And it helps me feel hope in the sense that it's not just my little self trying to scratch away change at the world, but rather an expression of a movement far more powerful and energetic and available than my own little ideas. That the reason I'm studying this and the reason that we are sharing this understanding together right now is a part of something much greater than our little self. And if we can allow that grand expression of the universe, which expresses itself in the form of love and friendship and connection and consciousness in our lives, then we can begin to express that in our movements for change. We can begin to express that in the way we shape our societies and create laws, the way we imagine economics. And if we slowly expand outward, extrapolate outward from that consciousness of this wonderfully mystical and divine origin, whatever that might be, it makes quite a difference in the way that we imagine the world should work.
Unity among the different races and the different communities belonging to different religions of India is indispensable to the birth of national life. Gandhi from the Collected Works, Volume 26.
India is probably the one country in the world that represents to the fullest the idea of unity in diversity. I started an article one time by saying India is a country of wide diversities and deep unities. And that led me finally to the understanding of unity and diversity, where diversity is the signature of the surface, of the outside world, and unity is the signature of the world within. If we can grasp this, we have an organizing principle for a new world.
This is yet another one of those phrases from Mr. Michael Nagler that has been incredibly transformative in my own life as a way of organizing my thoughts around how to talk about our lives, that diversity is the expression of the outside and unity is the expression of the inside. And that is our experience. And to allow that to become a way of shaping thoughts and expressions of the rules we create for our communities, the ethical situations and decisions we need to make from day to day, the way that I treat my wife, if I can hold that expression of the world, if I can see that as true for myself, that is transformative to the way that I work within the rest of my world. So I'm very grateful to Master Michael for sharing it.
Democracy and dependence on the military and police are incompatible. Gandhi from the Mind of Mahatma Gandhi.
Let's ask ourselves what the underlying principle of democracy is. The underlying principle of it is that each human being has the right to choose a path of fulfillment, and that our individual paths of fulfillment will not be in deep contradiction. There may be surface contradictions, and those can all be worked out through nonviolence. Gandhi was not the only one to recognize, incidentally, that nonviolence and democracy need one another. If you want to have a democratic regime in any meaningful sense of the word, it cannot be based on force, because force means that people essentially are separate and cannot be brought together. And democracy is based on just the exact opposite of that, that there is an underlying unity and people can find it.
More important discussions of democracy. And it is interesting that military and police, one of the qualities that they share is that it's the only form of state-sanctioned violence. They are supposed to have the monopoly on violence. They're the only ones allowed to use it. There are prescriptions of how they're supposed to use it, hopefully. And for everybody else, in this kind of violence we're talking about, it is prohibited for everyone else and against the law. And it's a very interesting way to run a nation, is to decide that violence is necessary, such to the point that we create several organizations to manage how it's used. And again, this is something far beyond my understanding and knowledge in the use and activity of nonviolence and peace works. I'm certain that there are whole books written about it that I'd like to read about. Please put them down below if you know of them. And yet, to recognize that in a democracy, the individuals are supposed to have the power to speak up and to say what they think is right, and to have that reflected in some small percentage way in the world around them. That's what a true democracy would be. And if that democracy then is also making use of violence which is directly against the people, remember, nobody wants violence, not really, not on them, then they're inherently incompatible. And so I'd have to think about this a lot more, and I will in the future. But I do feel as though Michael has a very good point in questioning this, and I can certainly see where Master Gandhi would want to, in the very least, limit the dependence of the community upon the military and the police, because that's implying that the community needs a lot of state-sanctioned violence in order to function, and that's probably not a good sign.
People will never be able to live in peace with each other in towns and palaces. They will have no recourse but to resort to both violence and untruth. We can realize truth and nonviolence only in the simplicity of village life. Gandhi in a letter to Nehru in October of 1945.
One might fervently wish that Nehru had taken this to heart, but it is a very interesting concept. We need to have a social organization that reflects unity and diversity, that it ultimately allows every single human being to develop his or herself in his or her own way without contradicting the well-being of the whole. In fact, by finding a way to contribute to the well-being of the whole. So if you start to divide things up in a rigid way, the way nations do, you are violating that principle. And as Gandhi says, you'll never get to peace that way.
One of the wonderful phrases from my own instructor, Master ChiChi, who I recommend that everybody go and check out, TaoistStudiesInstitute.com or .org. And he's often using a phrase which essentially is, you can't get there from there, which is to say, for instance, in physical movement, if I'm practicing a Qigong or Tai Chi movement, and I'm in a posture, and he's trying to demonstrate a new way of being in my body, and I'm trying to get there, if I'm trying to express that postural shift, he'll look at me and say, you can't get there from there, which is to say that the way that I'm being in my body at that moment, in my mind, expressing my energy at that moment, is incompatible with what I'm trying to create. And so he will have me completely reset, to just stand quietly or walk around a little bit, and to find the way of being in my body, the mode of entry the way of being in my mind that is free enough and capable enough, which can then move into the proper space that he's trying to show me. So then he might say, you can get there from there. And there are so many of these entry points that are worthy of exploring: stillness, compassion. And if we're trying to move to an exalted, high-level place of peace and nonviolence, but we're doing it through violent means or through stagnant means or ways that are not paying attention to the changes in our society, Gandhi's spirit may look over and shake his head and adjust his glasses and say, you can't get there from there. That the space that we're trying to reach in peace and equity needs to have certain precursors that we need to shape. We need to shape them for ourselves, for the space around us, economically. And if we're living in a space, for instance, where there are, as he's saying here, palaces, that means there's huge economic incompatibility. There are people who are having way too much and are greedy and taking from people that probably don't have enough. That instantly there's that social imbalance which will cause friction and conflict, and it is not a way to help people heal. First, we need to stabilize certain aspects of our lives before we can move toward a world that is filled with justice and balance and harmony. First, we need to move to the place that Gandhi, adjusting his spectacles, would look over and say, you can get there from there.
To remove the disease, we must first find the underlying cause. To find the remedy will then be a comparatively easy task. Gandhi from September 15th, 1940.
The underlying cause will always turn out to be the sense of separateness, what another Indian sage, Swami Ramdas, has called the delusion of separateness, that the ego, he said, is an obsession. Once we get past that, we can always find a way to resolve our problems. To use the model built by Marshall Rosenberg, the differences always are in the area of wants and not in the area of needs. So if we get down to our basic needs, we will find that they're not incompatible. And lo and behold, we're on our way to a democratic, peaceful world.
It is an amazing aspect of human nature that wants are in conflict, but needs never are. And if we can recognize that possibility and simply associate with and understand our own needs first, and then the needs of others, now we have a way forward. Rather than obsessing over our own wants and concerning ourselves with the want of the others, what is it that they actually need? And of course, we have to listen to ourselves and to them in order to find that out. We can't just assume. Please don't assume. You can't just say, well, what they need is to agree with me. That's not a need. But if, as Michael is recommending, we do some research and we look into Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication methods, where he describes needs and how to understand them, then we can begin to relate as people. They can relate to me, and they feel seen, and I can relate to them because I understand that particular need. That need for safety, for instance. That need for respect and dignity. These are things we can understand with, and we can offer those things. First, we respond to their needs, we relate to each other as people, and then we move forward in that space of relative harmony and this sense of shared humanity. And the results that come from that kind of negotiation and that kind of discussion, are far and away better than we'd get if I'm just trying to get people to give me what I want.
The spirit of nonviolence necessarily leads to humility. Gandhi from Young India, January 12, 1921.
In my personal experience, the way the commitment to nonviolence leads to humility is to enable me to discover how deep and how various are the roots of resentment and fear and individual greed that are buried in the mind that I've inherited and that I'm trying to deal with. So ultimately, one discovers that one cannot really reach perfect nonviolence by oneself. It requires a force more powerful than we are, which in effect, most of the time, for most of us, will mean resorting to God. And we can only get that to work if we have acknowledged our own helplessness. Swami Ramdas once said that it is important to make our maximum effort, not because that will work, but because it will show us that our maximum is not enough. That's where humility really comes in. And incidentally, when I say Swami Ramdas, I do not mean the American Harvard fellow, Richard Alpert. I mean the Indian Swami Ramdas, who has written about 6 or 7 amazing books about his travels throughout India. He was truly a realized sage, and we have visited his ashram when we were in India.
Yeah, there is so much understanding that is required in order to appreciate what he's calling here the spirit of nonviolence, and this humility that arises from it, because we recognize that it's impossible to create this on our own, that this isn't something that we can do. We can't lift up the whole world by ourselves. We can't, if we're writers, put out some sort of beautiful prose that makes everyone say, aha, now I get it. As activists, we can't hold the sign and fast ourselves into the rest of the world awakening. As teachers, there's no excellent lesson and witty repartee that I can offer, which will then get people to snap out of it and start taking care of each other at the communal level. This isn't a thing that we can do, but we, big W, will do it, because this is the shape of the world. And the movement that's coming through us is far bigger than we are. It's bigger than any individual. It's bigger than any particular thought or idea or solution. It's something that we express, but we cannot ourselves create. We can only be open to it. The more open we are, the more free we are, maybe we can say the more empty we are, then we can be filled with this spirit of love and compassion, this soul force, as Gandhi talks about it, which then expresses itself into the world through us. But it is not us. It's not the little us making the difference. So we have to develop humility. We have to get out of the way. We have to allow something much greater than we are to come through to help change this world for all of us.
Some of the immediate and brilliant results of modern inventions are too maddening to resist, but I have no manner of doubt that the victory of man lies in that resistance. We are in danger of bartering away the permanent good for a momentary pleasure. Gandhi, Young India, June 2nd, 1927.
This again is something that he was able to see coming, and which in our age with social media and so forth has become really acute, and that is the blandishments of media that draw us apart from one another as people and really end up giving us a very wrong idea of who we are. We are not creatures in search of sensation. We are beings in search of unity, of the ultimate harmony. And many of our inventions, which originally had the idea of making life easier, have made it more superficial, which in the end result means not easier at all.
sometimes taking the time to cultivate deeper revelation, deeper understanding of an issue ahead of time makes us then more easily move in to help be part of a solution later. If we have only a superficial understanding of an issue and we don't take the time to cultivate ourselves, to educate ourselves, to learn what other people have said first, we may move into the situation and just cause more problems than were there in the first place. And so, in some cases, for instance, the modern inventions that, at least in my time right now, for instance, are methods of social media and certain other cultivated tools that we use to communicate. Because of our desire to put them out quickly and to be the first ones to communicate it, the development of certain AI solutions, for instance, we can't resist putting them out as quickly as we can, but because they're superficial steps to prepare ourselves, that people weren't taking the time to deeply understand the tool that they were creating and what it would do to the society around us, we are now forcing the societies within which these tools were produced to now solve the problems created by these tools. And I can understand why that's very exciting to try these new things, but we need to be careful as we create things to understand what this tool is going to do to the communities within which we live, especially when they're such powerful tools as artificial intelligence, social media methods, these kinds of technological advances, which are exciting. Certainly, we're using it now. But we have to recognize the impact upon our societies as we create these things, to just pause a little bit, to have a little discussion about how to prepare for each of these changes, these transformations within our societies. And if we can take a long view, the permanent good that Gandhi's talking about here, and take the time to adjust for it, to safeguard the people, rather than rushing forward for that momentary pleasure, then perhaps as the further changes come along the technological pipe, that we can be prepared and we can remain healthy during these times of big change, which only seem to be speeding up.
Those who say that religion has nothing to do with politics do not know what religion means. Gandhi from his autobiography, The Story of My Experiments with Truth.
This is a really famous declaration of Gandhi's. I think to put it in context, one has to realize that he was what they would call in India a karma yogi. That is, one who worked out his salvation relying mainly on work, on effort, and of course, work in the right spirit, with the right means, and most importantly, with no attachment to the results. And I've recently been reading Martin Luther King and others who have talked about how in the giddy excitation of having achieved something, we also lose what we have achieved because we don't have that final detachment. So as a karma yogi, naturally, he would emphasize the need that he emphasizes here.
And to recognize the relationship of any society with politics, we can say that politics is the official action taken from a society. Politics is embedded in everything that we do. Anytime we advocate for ourselves at a level higher than in our household, it's a kind of political action. And anything that impacts us as people and our societies, that should resonate out through politics in any kind of official action and expression and communication that we take with each other. And so to recognize that, of course, not every country, not every community is dealing with the level of wild religious strife that Gandhi had to deal with. But religion historically has been a huge cause of strife all around the world, constantly, for millennia. The number of people that have been injured or killed in the name of their god or gods is I don't know, there must be a mountain of them. And so to recognize then that at the political level we need to advocate and understanding for each of these different religious convictions and the values that they hold, the beliefs that they nurture, the interpersonal laws that they require. Each of them is different. We have to recognize that they're important to people and that those are recognized at the governmental level so that we're not stepping on each other. But we also have to be careful because there are religions that advocate for some pretty scary things, some very immoral things. And I'm sure we can all think of some. So please be careful recognizing that we can't simply say, religions say good things and we should allow that into the moral ethical sphere of politics and government. Rather, we should say we have a sense of moral and ethical boundaries of human rights and human dignity that we want to uphold. And as so far as a religion meets with that circle of values, that we will uphold those and even support them in the governmental world. But we have to recognize that politics is constantly being influenced by the deep beliefs of people who might follow dogma and belief systems that are completely different than ours. And so we have to look deeper toward the values of each of these people and try to relate and connect to them there. Because it may be that whichever book or prophet or guru that they follow may have been saying something that is deeply damaging to the society that you're in, and that also has to be worked against. And so we must uphold our deepest levels of moral understanding and ethical values, supporting the highest good for everybody involved, so that our community can be moving forward rather than being held back on stagnant belief systems and misunderstandings of religious values. And I feel as though this is something that is continuing to heal within our human societies. And I'd love to hear about what you think within these things and how we can, as a society, move forward together toward greater peace, greater understanding, and greater ethical standards.
Individual civil disobedience among an unprepared people and by leaders not known to or trusted by them is of no avail, and mass civil disobedience is an impossibility. Gandhi, Young India, January 9, 1930.
One of the things that beginning activists often forget, in our film, The Third Harmony, Reverend James Lawson speaks very well to this, is that to be really effective satyagrahis, we need to have as much training and work out as much strategy as people do in military conflict. In fact, if anything, probably a little more.
I'm reminded of, as somebody who grew up in a military household, how much training military people go through in order to prepare themselves mentally and emotionally to go to war, to commit violence. There are very credible reasons to believe that a number of the basic training exercises that are gone through during at least most forms of military service that I've heard about, not having been in the military myself, that among most of them, it's a kind of mental preparation to hurt another human, a kind of state of numbness, a kind of state of automatic reactivity that has to be trained into you because people don't like to hurt other people if they're healthy. That most humans would hesitate and pause and freeze if they were told to just shoot another person, which is, of course, what happens in war. And that's a healthy reaction. And so much of military training is designed to overcome that very healthy reaction within humans toward hurting each other. And this goes to show how deeply embedded this law of nonviolence is within us, that our deepest nature is one of love and companionship, commitment to communal values. And if we can nurture those qualities within each other, then our whole world would be a much better place. And so do take the time to recognize that a number of the people that are involved in military action have themselves been damaged. They've been brainwashed or experienced violence so many times that emotionally they've been injured, as we see over and over again through suicide rates and the mental emotional damage that shows up later. I've treated it a lot in my own clinic. It's a very painful thing to experience. And so we have to recognize that quality about military people when we are with them. And if you yourself are a person that has gone through military action and has experienced or had to commit violence, please do seek help for it, because these kinds of things leave scars on the inside as often as on the outside. And you deserve to be healthy, and we need you to be healthy as part of our community. So do take the time to reach out and get that help. That's available everywhere in the world, I'm hoping. And if you're not quite sure where to look, please go ahead and put your information down below, and I can perhaps offer some suggestions, ways that you can look for support toward healing those internal wounds if they're causing you lots of pain and discomfort.
From my experience of hundreds, I was going to say thousands of children, I know that they have, perhaps, a finer sense of honor than you and I have. Gandhi, Young India, November 19th, 1931.
Well, in my experience of really thousands of young people at the university over the years, what's the thing that you often hear from young children? That's not fair. So they do have a very keen sense of justice, if you want to call it that. And because of the demoralizing effect of our experiences in modern life, that sensitivity has to be dulled, or else we really risk some kind of incapacity and breakdown. So this is an unfortunate thing. It would be very good to look at it very seriously and think, what would it take to keep that sense of honor, of fairness alive in a world that works for all?
And I wish that we had more representation of this honor and fairness for all in the media, in songs, and in movies, and the local stories that we tell. So often the stories that we tell uphold the greediest people in our world. We value the billionaires that were born rich and then invested well and became more rich, or we value the people who are especially beautiful and born with every advantage and then become even more powerful because people appreciate their beauty. And I've seen that cycle so often in the movies, and we celebrate the people born into nobility or the people born with incredible skills. And if we can simply value more than that, the opportunity for everybody to become their best self. What if we valued this basic story, the normal stories of the average person, and we can feel amazed and wonderfully excited that this person was given every chance they need to grow and flourish. They are supported by the people around them, by the government, by everybody. And the success story of that would be something worth celebrating, rather than being excited about war stories and other things where violence was enacted better than anybody else. This person was better at violence than anybody else, so now we're going to make a movie about them. And if instead we can cultivate this deep sense of honor, this commitment to compassion, this willingness to center our lives around supporting other people and helping the entire world feel better, if those become the heroes and heroine of our world, then, wow, those stories are ones that I enjoy hearing the most. And they're everywhere if you know where to look and to listen.
My aim is not to be consistent with my previous statements on a given question, but to be consistent with the truth as it may present itself to me at a given moment. The result has been that I have grown from truth to truth. Gandhi, August 30th, 1939.
We referred earlier to the way in which political activists today have become rigid, defining themselves in opposition all the time, how they lose that flexibility that Gandhi is talking about here. This flexibility meant that he might say something at one point which contradicted something that he said earlier on the same subject. It's because his awareness was growing. So he said, if you want to know where I stand, take my most recent statement on any given subject.
And it is important that we allow authors the chance to change their mind. We allow people who speak publicly to have their opinions grow and evolve over time. I want my elected officials to start with one opinion and to learn, and then to say, you know what, actually I've changed my opinion now, rather than to lambast them as flip-floppers and people that don't have consistent opinions, because we want people to be consistent with the truth, as Gandhi is saying here. And as we move from truth to truth, we evolve, because we can't know everything. Nobody's perfect. And so even during these recordings here, I've noticed my opinions shifting as I've been exposed to Gandhi's opinions, and I've done my own research outside and listening to Michael and reading other wonderful books. And I can say that the opportunity to grow and learn with you is what I'm enjoying most about this. And if I can recommend a book, for instance, that I'm finishing right now, it is a book called Paradise Built in Hell. And I think it's by Rebecca Solnit, something like that. And she is going around interviewing people that have been in horrible situations: earthquakes, grand disasters, fires, explosions, hurricanes, these kinds of things where entire communities are decimated. And the result of it so often is that people come together in incredible selflessness and community and love and support. People are incredibly friendly and patient and kind. And so many of the people that she interviews within these communities and gives you pictures of what happened talk about how it was the best time in their lives. Not just because of the kind of thing where it was a terrible incident and that taught me how to grow and it was a transformative experience and now I'm better off. Not that kind of thing. But it was the best time in their life because it was when they were the happiest. They were the most loving, the most friendly. They felt they had a sense of purpose. They felt a sense of community and the love and support from their families and strangers they meet on the street. And it's such a common story. And it is a very different story than the one that I was taught growing up, that when people are in difficult circumstances, they turn into animals and they hunker down and they get really selfish and they take what they can. It turns out that story, not very often true. More often is that humans open up. Even as traumatized and as difficult the circumstance can be, we form communities. We come together, even with other strangers, and we try to help. People risk their lives. They risk everything in order to uplift somebody they've never met before. And that gives me great hope about the nature of humanity. And I noticed, as I've been finishing this book, that it changed my perspective and my opinions about what happens in the world and how much we can rely upon strangers and how much I've been conditioned to be fearful of the other because I assume that people are in it for themselves and willing to resort to violence at a drop of a hat. And certainly I'm sure that's true in some situations, but in most situations for humans, we uncover the fact that we are deeply good and kind to each other. And given the opportunity, we can build structures and support each other and be relied upon to be our very best selves. That's our deepest nature. And if we can build a society around those deeper truths, allowing people to express that, not only does it make for a safer, better world for everybody, but clearly people like it. People like being this way. We just need to give them more opportunities to explore it.
Nonviolence, being the mightiest force in the world, and also the most elusive in its working, demands the greatest exercise of faith. Gandhi from Volume 5 of Mahatma.
For myself, I've come to regard faith not as a kind of blind faith, that one maintains in the face of contradictions, but rather a deep faith that underlying contradictions, there will emerge a truth which is meaningful and helpful and reasonable for struggling human beings like us. So that kind of faith, which is open to correction from time to time based on one's experiences, is the faith that I think enables us to be truly religious and to grow spiritually.
And I feel like this word translated to English here, faith, at least in its modern context, has a different meaning than is often meant within spiritual traditions of faith, within Buddhism, within Taoism. The Taoist word xin is this quality of faith or trust. And it's not referring to blind faith in the sense that it's often used in my culture, which is I read a thing and somebody told me it's true and now I believe it wholeheartedly. That would be considered a mistake and actually a misuse of our intellect and leads it to bad places. Is if I don't have a reason to believe something, I shouldn't believe it. But if I am able to observe over and over again certain qualities to be true, for instance, there's a chair. If I sit down in the chair, and every day in my life I sit down in the chair and the chair doesn't break, it doesn't evaporate, I don't fall through the chair to the ground, I can reasonably trust that the chair will support me. That's what chairs do in my world. And there's a kind of faith in that. And it allows me to act with confidence and to move forward without having to second guess myself every time I'm about to lower myself onto a chair. And in fact, it would be injurious and not helpful for me to lack confidence in the chair's ability to hold me up. It would cause a lot of problems for me. But it's built upon experience that's testable. Maybe I heard from a wise person, like my mother when I was a child, who said, you can sit on that chair, and it's okay. And because of her, I trusted it, and I did sit on the chair, and it worked. And maybe the first few times after that, I'm still a little uncertain about sitting on the chair. But after a while, that certainty is now mine. I have now faith in the solidity of that chair. And this is a funny example, but I'm trying to use one that's non-controversial. And in this same quality, as we engage in acts of peace work and nonviolence, using these methods of compassion to change the world, at first we kind of go, well, I don't know. But we keep trying. We keep paying attention. These experiments with truth, experiments in nonviolence. And we watch the changes that occur. And over a lifetime, we develop deep abiding awareness and knowledge, this deep faith. As certain as I am of sitting in the chair, I am certain that by being compassionate and loving in my community, that the effects are not only good for me, but good for the community, even if I don't see the immediate results. That's the kind of faith we're talking about. That way I don't have to constantly second guess myself and wonder if things are happening. Instead, I can move forward in my life and make changes and be part of this transformation of the world in a way that a lack of confidence and a hesitation and a constantly trying to reinvent the wheel would only stifle. So do develop faith, but the right kind of faith, the right kind of understanding of your practice and what we're trying to create here, and move forward toward making the world a better place with confidence, because you can do this.
God resides in every human form, indeed in every particle of his creations, and everything that is on his earth. Gandhi, Mahatma, from Volume 4.
This is perhaps the biggest contradiction between the popular conception of Christianity and the popular and eternal conception of the Vedanta, namely that in the former, there is a tendency to believe that God is an external being, whereas in the Vedanta, the creation myth was God expanding himself into a visible universe, or at least seeming to expand himself into a visible universe where there are separateness and contradictions. Be that as it may, once we grasp, once we have the vision that God exists in every particle of creation, which Dostoevsky, incidentally, gave voice to in a very dramatic way at one point in, I believe, The Brothers Karamazov, then nonviolence is inevitable. We can do nothing but try to grow more and more nonviolent with every day.
One of the funniest examples of Dostoevsky's work that he's talking about, that Michael Nagler is talking about here, is one character in that book who decides that there is no God, there is no spirit, therefore there's no reason not to do the worst possible things. And so he becomes a thief and a murderer and a liar. Basically, he goes mad and becomes a psychopath and just becomes the worst person imaginable because he says, nothing matters anyway. And part of the joke of that to me, and maybe the point that he was trying to make, hopefully, isn't that without a religion or without something that gives you specific moral rules to abide by, you become a mad person and just do all of the worst things imaginable. But rather, I thought that he was highlighting an extreme idea about that, which is to say that people inside, again, as long as they're healthy enough and not broken, because there are certain people born with, for instance, a lack of empathy or an incapacity to understand that there are other people out there. I feel like those are injuries in the way that there are brain injuries and emotional injuries. We have to account for those people, certainly. But for the normal, healthy human, as I'm referring to them, inside we have a sense that we don't want to hurt other people. We don't want to do damage to things, in the same way that I was saying that we put these people into a military and we have to train them to be less kind because kindness is our natural way of being. That, for instance, when I was approached by a religious person who wanted to know what rules that I follow, if I didn't have a book telling me which specific rules I should follow, what I would do, why didn't I just go out and start murdering and raping people? I mentioned specifically, I said, well, I actually do all of the murdering and raping that I want to do, which is to say none. I don't need a book to tell me not to do those things, because why would I do those things? And it requires a very injured person to be attracted to those things, a person who's been through extreme violence themselves or emotional damage or moral injury to be attracted to those things. And so for me, to recognize that this deep inherent nature of humanity is one of kindness and goodness. And as Gandhi would say here, that God resides in every human. Every particle of everything that we do on this earth is this expression of the spirit, which in this case is compassionate and loving and free and aware and inclusive and expansive. That's what we're referring to here. And to recognize that that is a part of what we are, and that we don't need someone to tell us how to be. If we can listen to this still small voice inside, then it gives us a place to look in order to find better rules to follow and better ways to treat our fellow humans. And so you can do these practices going inside, becoming very quiet, learning to listen, learning to have faith in these quiet experiences, and allow stillness to cultivate wisdom, and then wisdom to express itself in your daily life. So you don't have to follow rules written down by somebody else. And now, allow me to say, for the people who are listening that might find themselves having been injured or with extreme volatile emotional spectrum problems, maybe some people are born psychopathic, and that is an issue that some people deal with. If you really do require rules in order to follow ethical guidelines, I 100% support you in looking those up and following them, just in the same way that for a blind person, maybe they need braille and handrails to help them find their way around. We're all made differently, and some people need more help acting in moral and ethical guidelines than others do. Most of us don't, but if that's you, then you're doing a wonderful thing by following the things that have been laid down by wise people coming before. And thank you for following those, because we need a society where people feel safe. But for those of us that have that deep internal sense that we want to help people, and I assume that's why you're listening to this series, then by tuning into that quality inside you, not outside you, looking for those truths as they manifest inside, and then allowing them to flower outward into your life and your community, I feel like that is a really powerful and healthy way to act.
If I had no sense of humor, I should long ago have committed suicide. Gandhi, Young India, August 18th, 1921.
Well, what can we say? Humor, when correctly addressed and correctly experienced, is an absolutely essential mechanism or capacity within us as activists, because it does seem so often that the world is a dismal place and that our activism is not large enough to reform it. We have to remember that in the Vedantic worldview, this creation of ours is called Leela, God's play. And so humor is an essential part of it. If we know how and when to not take ourselves too seriously, to laugh at the absurdities of life around us, it can lighten us up and enable us to go on acting, even in the face of apparent setbacks. Without humor, I can't say I would have committed suicide, but I would say I would be really depressed.
And this wonderful sense of humor that's clearly shown by Michael and by Gandhi, I feel as though clearly it is a part of their method of self-healing, that they've incorporated it into their daily lives. This light-hearted attention to the way they are in the world especially, and the difficulties in the world around them. That if we are able to treat them lightly, to see the irony in a situation, to allow things to become hilarious because they are contradictions of what exactly happened before, that it seems as though the universe itself has a kind of sense of humor. Have you noticed that? That there's something that happens that seems perfectly suited for the situation, sometimes in the exact opposite way that we wanted. And by allowing ourselves to appreciate that quality of the universe, I actually feel like it's a natural outgrowth of the same wisdom that comes from inside us that creates compassion and love. That it's another aspect of human nature, and some way to appreciate the funny contradictions and the unexpected shapes of the world around us, and allows us to heal in ways that might otherwise take a long time if we take things way too seriously.
When I despair, I remember that all through history, the way of truth and love have always won. There have been tyrants and murderers, and for a time they can seem invincible. But in the end, they always fall. Think of it, always. Gandhi from the film Gandhi.
In order to have faith, we very often have to take a long, long view, because we can be in such miserable situations, and it's only in the long view that we can really see what Martin Luther King called the arc of history. When we can see it, we see that it is constantly trending upward. It may not be a whole lot of comfort to us in our immediate situation, but I think, as I say, if we take the long view, we can have that faith that things are moving correctly, and then we know that our efforts will be supported. That's just so important.
Super inspiring. And as Michael mentions, Martin Luther King Jr.'s discussion that The arc of justice is long, but it bends toward justice. To recognize that quality, that it's an immutable law of nature and humankind, that we move in this direction of healing, that it's part of our natural evolution. It's a response to the space around us. We're moving toward love. We're finding compromise. We're developing our laws of justice in humanity, even though it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and that step back includes a lot of death and pain. But we are moving forward as a species. We just have to survive long enough to get all the way through toward the world we're trying to create. And allow me to reread this quote from the film from Gandhi. This was actually quoted to me by Rivera's son in the wonderful interview that we did together. Again, you should check that out if you haven't seen it yet. Please do put down below in the comment section whether or not you've seen it and what you think of it. But I just cannot think of a better way to explore this than to just repeat the words. When I despair and remember all through history that the way of truth and love has always won. There have been tyrants and murderers, and for a time they can seem invincible, but in the end they always fall. Think of it. Always. And that gives me so much hope. This is the way of the world. These things happen. They tear themselves apart because that's the nature of violence, of corruption. It doesn't plant anything good. It salts the earth where it's trying to grow something. And so if we can continue to cultivate in ourselves that which is wholesome and loving, things that help things grow, if we can nurture the soil of our own communities and help it to grow and heal and unity and diversity, then there is so much opportunity for us as a people to become better and better versions of ourselves. We can develop faith in that because we see it happening all of the time. And you yourself are an example of that. And so if you see yourself healing and becoming a better and better version of yourself, more and more wise, then right there you have proof that it works. Together we can do this. You got this.